Happy Thursday morning, everybody. Paul Russo here for FairLakes1.com. Following Syracuse Orange's loss in the ACC tournament yesterday to Wake Forest, legendary coach Jim Boeheim was announced that he is stepping down from the head coaching position of the Orange. Obviously, we all know about Boeheim, lifelong Syracuse guy from player, GA to coach, all the way through. I'm joined by Jim Sanacropi and Nate Sharman here. Guys, first thought that kind of ran through my head was, as much as I thought we might see this coming, I didn't really fully expect it to happen yesterday. But kind of in typical, what I would call Boeheim/Syracuse fashion, a little bit murky, a little bit confusing, and that, I think, has left a lot of people with raised eyebrows, kind of wondering, what really happened.
Yeah, he didn't announce he was stepping down, right? The university
Right.
announced he was stepping down, and that Adrian Autry was taking over. And my first initial reaction, as I was driving to to Penn Yan to cover the Newark basketball game yesterday, which ironically a team that Jim Boeheim played against in high school when Jim Boeheim went to Lyons.
Right.
I heard, it came on the radio, and my first reaction was I was sad, because my entire life as a Syracuse basketball fan and a student and alumni has been with Jim Boeheim there, running the basketball program and being the biggest public face of the university as well. And so I was sad. It makes me feel old. As a fan, it's always been interested to think, okay, what will change after he's gone? Generally, in these cases, it's not good for a program when a legendary coach steps down. There's a drop-off, but it's been a struggle the past couple of years. I don't necessarily blame that on Boeheim as much as I do being in the ACC conference as a Northeastern school, but we'll see, what the next chapter brings. But my first reaction was sadness.
Well, I do want to circle back around to the Big East portion of that here in a minute, because it was really interesting. I know you mentioned how you heard. And it was kind of crazy because even before the formal announcement, I'll call it, following his press conference, the next game afterwards was Pitt and Georgia Tech in the ACC tournament. And a large portion of that discussion, the first half of that game, was nothing really on the court between the Panthers and the Yellow Jackets. It was about Jim Boeheim and his comments post-game in the press conference, how he alluded to the fact that he already allegedly, and apparently so, had made his quote-unquote retirement speech last Saturday night during the jersey retirements of Hakeem Warwick and Jerry McNamara and the honoring of the 2003 national championship team. So I found that really kind of interesting, because at the time, I was getting texts from friends from out of state, from college and stuff like that, and they're just like, so he's actually retired? I'm like, I don't think so. I want to pump the brakes. I don't think anything's going to happen, if anything, for another couple weeks.
Well, also on a side note, people are saying, well, man, it's a crappy way to go out after losing the ACC tournament. But no, he really went out on the 20th anniversary of his national championship with all those great players around in the Carrier Dome after a win. So, yeah, it was, but still, even this morning, people are confused as to what actually happened. It didn't happen in the way that a normal legendary coach would retire. But you know what? That's Boeheim, and I'm glad he didn't have a farewell tour like Coach K's farewell tour, going to all these places. Boeheim did what he did. He never cared. He didn't give any F's his entire career. You know what I mean?
Correct.
And so why would it be this way? He wasn't a guy that even felt comfortable with that type of adoration, but the fans of Syracuse loved him. And also, ironically, and kind of in a disappointing way, a lot of fans of Syracuse or upstate New York, central New York residents who might not have been fans, didn't like him and would bash him. And I never, ever, ever understood that. Here's a guy born in Lyons, New York, goes to Syracuse as a student and a player, walks on, he joins a team that didn't win a game in 2 years. By the time he left, they were a winning program with Dave Bing. Comes back as an assistant, head coach, never leaves, was offered NBA positions. Ohio State came after him hard, offering him way more money, never left. He's one of our own guys, and there's people around here who want to be fans of North Carolina or Duke or some other school around the country they have no connection to, when Jim Boeheim almost single-handedly brought big-time athletics to our own backyard. Big Monday, some of the biggest, sports, contests and games in the country were right in our backyard that we could go to. The largest college basketball crowds in the country in the history were in Syracuse, half an hour from where we sit in this studio.
Yeah.
And so I never understood the Boeheim bashing from locals. As a matter of fact, if you're the type of person that really wanted to bash Boeheim and didn't like him, maybe look at yourself. That makes me feel like you don't like yourself.
It's fair.
Take a look inside. Look in the mirror.
Nate, what were your initial thoughts yesterday? I know you were quick to send me a message, more or less like, wait, is this actually true type thing? So what was your gut reaction when you first saw the news yesterday?
Yeah, I was, of course, wanting that for Jim Boeheim to step down all season. I've been vocal about that. But I didn't want it to happen like that yesterday. He goes out after that, crushing loss in the ACC tournament. He goes out, he does his usual thing where he yells at reporters and answers kind of in a gnarly way. I would say, I did my retirement speech already, and just I know he's a legendary coach, and Syracuse basketball is nothing without him for sure. There's no debate about that. I wanted it to be a little bit more, I don't know if peaceful is the right word, but just a little bit more celebratory in nature than kind of how it went.
Well, a lot of people bash Boeheim for the way he is in those press conferences, but I'm missing when it's gone. Like, who else post-game press conference you want to watch where it's just, the standard PC, straight lines, and then they say how they really think for maybe the locker room with the team. But, Boeheim's press conferences were highly entertaining. They were must-watch, if you were a Syracuse fan. And the other thing is, look, Syracuse has one of the best journalism schools in the country in Newhouse, and if you were a student that had achieved a status to be able to cover the team on that level and go to these press conferences and ask him questions, well, you were getting some on-the-job training that you probably weren't going to be able to get anywhere else. So, he was a curmudgeon, and he turned a lot of people off with the way that he dealt with reporters, but on the other hand, if you do something for 47 years and the press has always been unkind to him, you probably don't remember. They wanted him gone in the 80s. I remember when there was a effort to try to get Tom Penders to come to Syracuse. You know who Tom Penders is?
The name is familiar.
Texas coach, Rhode Island coach. He's passed away, but he became available, and there were people in the 1980s that said they wanted Tom Penders. And then in the 90s, he just constantly would get bashed by certain members of the media that hated him, certain members of the local media that didn't like him because maybe he turned him off. But grow some thick skin. I mean, geez, it was always interesting, right?
Fair, yeah, definitely. Let's talk about, you mentioned the 80s, and I want to actually start by kind of working back towards that in a way. Because I think the past decade of, I'd say, Syracuse Orange basketball has kind of clouded maybe a little bit of what the mystique and really stats of Jim Boeheim has brought. So I got some stats here, if you will, really from the past 10 years, which has been, all but one of the ACC years for the Orange. You look back to the 2014 season, which was actually probably their best years numerically in the past decade. Made it to the NCAA round of 32, a 28-6 overall record. After that, in 2015, 18 and 13, that was the year that they had to serve the postseason ban. Made the NCAA Final Four in 2016, NIT the following year, Sweet 16 in 2018, 2019, NCAA first round, 2020 wash obviously with the pandemic. And then the last postseason that the Orange made in 2021 made a Sweet 16 after an 18 and 10.
So how many Sweet 16s in the last decade? 2 Sweet 16s, 1 Final Four?
Yeah.
So 3 Sweet 16s because obviously
Correct.
the Final Four year. And then 1 year where they were ineligible. So how many coaches in the country right now would love that resume for the last 10 years when Boeheim was supposedly, destroying the program or whatever they want to say?
And that's what I wanted to talk about, because I think a little bit kind of gets clouded up in the fact that the Orange, right, this is a full decade now, they've been in the ACC, a move that even Boeheim called out as being a football/money move,
Yeah.
and has not really benefited too much outside the other programs. We've kind of seen
Hasn't benefited
residual
football
maybe of that,
either. It
but-
hasn't benefited
right.
anything except for maybe the
I'd say maybe
financials
soccer, yeah.
in the bursar's office at
Right.
Syracuse University. But yeah, look, that's part of it too. Like Boeheim is a Big East guy, and he's forced into the Southern Conference. He could have stepped away and retired then, but I think he wanted to. He kind of liked the idea of seeing some of his old guys, like Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski, and was willing to try something new. But Boeheim isn't really a proponent of change. He doesn't take change too well. He's kind of stubborn, and so maybe he didn't adjust as well. But I told you, I said it before Syracuse even joined the ACC, that this was going to be a nightmare. We're a northern school in a southern conference, and just look at the stupid ACC tournament in Greensboro, North Carolina. Again, they're a southern conference. They're cared about their tradition and their roots. And look, did you see Big East tournament games yesterday? The
Sold
place
out.
was sold out and just electric at Madison Square Garden. How the ACC doesn't want to embrace the East Coast nature of the Atlantic Coast Conference and put that conference tournament in Madison Square Garden just shows, why they're the worst of all the Power 5 conferences in the country.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd say they're probably second to worst, but
Who, Pac-10?
Pac 10, 12, 8, whatever they may be now. But
Yeah.
yeah, but you mentioned MSG. Let's talk about the Big East, because Jim Boeheim, although maybe not the true center figure of the reason of success, certainly one of the key pillars in the Big East.
Tough to say, center. I mean, Dave Gavitt
Well, I
was
was
probably
going
the
to say
center.
Dave Gavitt was the
But
center, yeah.
it was really the tapestry of coaches in urban-based schools,
Right.
going back to the old ECAC, that made it amazing and must watch TV. They created ESPN. Big East basically elevated ESPN. They created must-see TV with Big Monday basketball, which was right up there with Monday Night Football. Really, it was just a phenomenon. I mean, still now, 40 years later, we're talking about Jerome Lane busting the backboard and a lot of those great games, but there was nothing like it. And I know, gather around, everybody, and old man's talking. The Big East in the 1980s was just absolutely incredible, and Boeheim was such a fiery competitor, going up against guys like Georgetown and John Thompson. Like, think about those Georgetown teams. Evil Empire, Patrick Ewing and all these other guys, Michael Graham and John Thompson, just such an intimidating presence, a top-ranked team in the country for much of the mid-'80s and early '80s, and Boeheim went toe-to-toe with them, knocked them down a notch, battled with them, and when they got screwed in a Big East final once, Boeheim throws a chair in the post-game press conference, says the best team didn't win. I mean, things like that were just absolutely amazing, and kids from around the country wanted to come to Syracuse so they could play in the Carrier Dome, so they could play for Coach Boeheim, and so they could play in the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden and play and compete in the Big East on Big Monday. I mean, it was a phenomenon, and Boeheim was a huge part of making that happen, along with Raleigh Massimino and Lou Carnesecca, and you name it.
I'll say, please put some respect on my guy PJ Carlesimo.
PJ Carlesimo, sure. Jim Calhoun. It was amazing, and you know what? Boeheim outlasted all those guys by 20 years.
More than that in some regards. Yeah, for me, because as much as I think the heyday probably still is that mid to late 80s run of Big East basketball, I like the era that I did grow up in with the Big East in that mid 2000s, where maybe the names weren't quite as recognizable at the time, but I'll never.
You got your Ray Allens.
Well, I was going to say,
Allen Iversons.
Well, I was going to say for me, that era, because you have kind of what I call the second era of Big East teams, where it's like a lot of these Catholic schools kind of come in, like Marquette, DePaul, and characters, maybe not as great, but, Buzz Williams for me for a while, something about him and Marquette I just hated for a while.
Yeah, we faced
admittedly.
him in the Elite Eight,
Yeah.
I think, Marquette, or maybe it was Sweet 16. But Yeah, it was a conference that lived on beyond the 80s, and was a great conference, and I just loved watching us outplay the ACC in,
Yeah.
in NCAA tournaments or the ACC Big East Challenge. And the ACC, in my opinion, never really could compete with the Big East, other than maybe the top couple programs in Duke and North Carolina, and it drove them crazy. The ACC wanted things that the Big East had that they could never have, and so in the era of conference alignment, they just picked it apart. Picked it apart.
Let's talk about some other Boeheim, what I call hallmarks here. 2005 Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame inductee. Obviously, one of the key head associate coaches of the U.S. men's national team for a number of years, to the point that a lot of NBA pros who never even remotely got close to Boeheim, a guy like, say, LeBron James, even regards him fairly highly.
Right.
Which is, to me, funny because we talk about now this little, maybe retrospective here in the past 18 or so hours about, really his legacy and stuff like that, and how maybe all of us have treated him in some way, shape, or form, even this year, kind of the way he's coached and made decisions. But, the players talk about how much he knows the game, how much he cares about the game, and how much it has impacted them out on the court.
Yeah, and maybe some people wanted him to be more of a mentor of young men than he was willing to be, But yeah, he's regarded by anybody in the know as one of the greatest basketball minds that ever lived. And so we can pick apart some things that are general Boeheim bashers. And one is like the 2-3 zone. And, all you need is somebody to hit a few three. People always say, oh, the 2-3 zone doesn't work, that people shoot threes. Well, if you remember the best iterations of the zone, they were the best defenses in the country in terms of points allowed. And the 2-3 zone could defend the three-point line just fine if you had the proper personnel and kids willing to play it. And so, like this year, for example, you can't do it with Joe Girard. You couldn't play it with Joe Girard the same way you could with Michael Carter-Williams, So that's a big part of it, but obviously he came on the Olympic team to coach the 2-3 zone to these guys, and he, in this big world of college basketball where you have 200 teams, competing, you got, in my opinion, you need to do something to differentiate yourself to gain a competitive advantage. And one thing that Jim Boeheim did was perfect the 2-3 zone and stick with it exclusively, while nobody else would be willing to do that. And that's one of the reasons we had a lot of success, and we wouldn't have won the 2003 national championship if we didn't play the 2-3 zone. We wouldn't have got to the Final Four with Michael Carter-Williams and when we lost to Michigan in the semis without they were the best defense in the country that year. So you need the personnel with some length, and then you needed upperclassmen as well who were able to learn the nuances of it. Because watching Jim Boeheim adjust that zone for different teams and situations was a masterclass in coaching. So anybody that wants to think that, he just rolled out the 2-3 zone, he doesn't know what he's coaching, you don't know what you're talking about. It was a master class in coaching, the way he put together the 2-3 zone and used it exclusively. So, I mean, that's one thing I can't stand. The other thing that I can't stand is, he could never win the big one. That's why Boeheim isn't great, because he never could win the big one. Oh, my God. He could never win the big one. First of all, he did win the big one. He won the national championship. And you don't think that winning in an Elite Eight game to get to the Final Four like he did 4 times isn't winning a big one, or winning a national semifinal game against Texas, blowing them out, until this last trip to the Final Four, he never lost in the semifinals. So in Big East championships, Big East tournament championships, those were big ones, and he won them against teams that had Patrick Ewing, Alonzo Mourning, Ray Allen. It's ridiculous. And the 6 overtime game, I mean, couldn't win the big one. I mean, show me a handful of coaches won more big ones. Couldn't win the big one, man. That makes me crazy, because not only did he did win the big one, and if you look at the whole history of college basketball, how many coaches have won a national championship? Maybe like 40, 45, and he's one of them. And in the modern era, in the old days, it was a much smaller tournament. It was easier to get there. But in the modern era of 64 teams, Boeheim won plenty of big ones. So don't tell me that he can't win the big one.
Yeah, because it's funny you do mention that, but if you want to even talk about the names we previously mentioned, right? Riley Massimino only has one title. If you want to make a case there, John Thompson only has the one.
Nobody's on their ass.
Right. Well, I hear you there. I certainly hear you there. Let's talk a little bit here for a quick second about the new head coach, Adrian Autry.
Real quick, though.
Sure.
You want to talk about winning the big one. You're in New Orleans in 1987, and Derek Coleman's at the free throw line. If he makes the free throw, they win the national championship. He misses, and then Keith Smart comes down, and a guy that wasn't a big-time player, he wasn't Steve Alford, and he hits this kind of fadeaway baseline shot with Howard Trish right in his face, playing excellent defense, and it goes in. Is that if it goes out, if it doesn't go in, or Coleman hits the free throws, does that mean Boeheim can win the big one all of a sudden? A lot of it, you need a little luck on your side. Right. Even look at like Mike Krzyzewski, first national championship on the road to get there. Christian Laettner had to hit this dream turnaround, shot. So does that make Krzyzewski a better coach because Laettner hit that shot and Keith Smart hit that shot for Indiana? A lot of it comes down to just luck.
Yeah, no, definitely. Plus, the 87 one obviously sticks out because it's a play that, it's a coin flip kind of in a way. That's
right.
So,
and then in 96, because the referees kind of got John Wallace in foul trouble, that was the one thing that couldn't happen. And so Boeheim brings in a team with John Wallace and Jason Cipolla and Lazarus Sims, and they go up against a team in Kentucky that had 7 future NBA players. And they, John Wallace gets some couple phantom fouls, and so it absolutely makes me crazy when people say something like Jim Boeheim can't win the big one. He has won plenty of big ones with lesser talent from up here in central New York, putting Syracuse on the map nationally against these blue blood programs, and people around here want to bash him, say he can't win the big one, or the people around here want to be fans of these other colleges across the country that they have no connection from. I went to Syracuse, but you don't need to have gone to Syracuse to live around here and feel like they're your hometown team. All right, sorry.
You're good. Let's talk about Adrian Autry here for a couple moments. Syracuse player, 4-year player, still ranks 5th in career assists and 6th in career steals for the Orange. 10-year pro over in Europe after his playing career got done in Syracuse. Comes back stateside, has a couple different coaching jobs at the high school level before jumping to the college level, first with the Virginia Tech,
assistant, yeah.
And then coming over in 2011 back to Syracuse as the assistant. In 2016 was named the associate head coach formally and is now the head coach of the Syracuse Orange.
I'm excited. It's funny because
I don't want to interrupt you quick, but I do have a question for you as well to kind of tee up this. Were you surprised that it was Autry and not McNamara?
No.
Okay.
Autry has head coaching experience. He has more coaching experience than Jerry McNamara. I don't really know how Jerry McNamara would perform as a head coach, but I kind of feel like Autry's ready to do it. I did always think that Syracuse would hand it over to someone internally. For a while, we thought it would be Mike Hopkins. Just on a side note, Hopkins did take over for a brief period when Boeheim was dealing with I think it was when he was dealing with prostate cancer, yes. But Boeheim stepped away for a period of several weeks.
And when he was
and
suspended
Hopkins,
too.
Yeah, and Hopkins struggled.
Yeah.
That was just a blip in time. I'm not saying that Mike Hopkins wouldn't have done a great job because I love Mike Hopkins too, but
and he's done a pretty admirable job, kind of, I wouldn't say fully resurrecting a Washington program.
One good year.
Has brought him back a little bit.
That's the thing is, like, people take for granted what we had in Syracuse. Look at all these other colleges across the country that would have killed to be in Syracuse position or to deliver to their fans what Boeheim delivered to our fans. And it's also interesting. My father went to Syracuse University, and he was there when Jim Boeheim was there as a student and a player. So that's, that just shows how long Boeheim's been there. When I was at Syracuse, Adrian Autry was a student and a player. And I actually lived on South Campus my sophomore year, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would ride the bus from South Campus to main campus with Adrian Autry. Now, so if anybody needs tickets, now, but no, I wouldn't, I'm not going to go as far as to say that Adrian Autry and I were good buddies, but we rode the bus together. I would say, hey, Red, good game last night, or stuff like that. And now he's a head coach. It's just strange. It does make me feel a little old, but I'm the same age as Adrian Autry, and it's weird, I suppose. It's probably less weird having Boeheim being replaced by a younger guy, because as a kid, I always looked up to Syracuse, and, Boeheim was this older gentleman. It would feel weird for me now as a 51-year-old man to have a coach at Syracuse who was 10 or 15 years younger than me in a strange way. I don't know, but I'm excited about Adrian Autry. Syracuse now has 3 black head coaches in their big 3 programs: the women's basketball team and Felicia Leggett, Dino Babers for football, and Adrian Autry. And a lot of things, that's really been something about Syracuse University as far as the civil rights movement goes, or the history of African Americans in this country. Jim Brown, Ernie Davis, Sadat Singh, going way back. Syracuse has really been out in front, I guess. Certainly when compared to our southern friends in the ACC.
Correct.
So definitely. Another reason why I just don't get some of the local bashing of Syracuse, or people that live around here that hate Syracuse and don't like Boeheim. It really drives me crazy. I hate to keep coming back to it, but it drives me crazy, and it always has.
What do we think the next, I wouldn't say step for Boeheim is, because I think now there's some questions. I know mentioned about maybe being an ambassador of sorts within the program.
I hope he's still there.
Buddy jokingly said, will be more time for golf.
Yeah, I hope he plays a lot of golf. He's played golf at Seneca Falls Country Club here in Seneca Falls, forever that's worth. But, yeah, he's always loved the game of golf. Guy's a competitor. That's the thing that people think, especially he's getting older now, so it seems like he doesn't care or doesn't want to win. But believe me, he does. And there was never anybody that had a fire inside of him to win more than Jim Boeheim. I mean, he was obsessive. His first marriage ended because of it. He was just single-minded, and you could see it, on the sidelines. So what's next? I mean, he would be highly entertaining in any type of analyst role, but I think he's also maybe getting a little too old to want to do that, I hope he enjoys himself. I hope he's still a presence at Syracuse games and at the university, and I'm sure he'll be a resource for Adrian Autry. And Nate, what do you think about Adrian Autry as far as now that Jim Boeheim has stepped down and Syracuse, and now the sky's the limit? They could hire anybody in the world or launch a coaching search, but they named Adrian Autry. What do you think about that?
I'm good with the hire. My biggest question, though, I'm not as much as a basketball X and O's guy as you. Will they continue to play zone is my biggest question.
I would like them to. If they have the personnel, I don't want to knock Boeheim in any way now that this, on the day after he's announced, or the university announced or whatever, that he's not going to be coaching anymore. But at times over the years, and more so recently now that they're in the ACC, it has been frustrating as a fan to realize that Boeheim is way too stubborn to change things from what he feels is the correct way. So I think he's probably had trouble relating to his kids, not his kids, but his players, as well as maybe he did in the past. And part of it was his reluctance to do much different. So, we saw it even yesterday against Wake Forest. Syracuse gets down, and that's when Boeheim goes to the press. And then when they get close enough again, he calls it off, and he will say, because you can't do that all game. But I look at the roster, especially this year, and I'm like, yeah, you kind of can do it this year if you're willing to go 10 deep. You can press most of the game, and maybe to come into a season like this with this particular roster, for Boeheim to say we're going to do something a little different this year. We're going to play a lot of more full court press right off the bat, first half press, not wait till we're down. But he never did. Too bad you couldn't place prop bets on Boeheim's coaching decisions in game, because I would be a rich man. Hit 4 minutes with a a 4 or 5 point lead. He's going to slow it down. He's going to take the air out of the ball. And that would be incredibly frustrating at times, although statistically he was probably doing the right thing. He was an analytical guy. And same thing with like the decisions for, if you follow a 3-point shooter, all that stuff. You could really set your clock by Jim Boeheim being ultra predictable in what he was doing. Even, when he'd pull a player out who made a mistake, or that's the last we're going to see of Paul Harris tonight, stuff like that. Very predictable, and so if there was one thing about Boeheim that I kind of wish that he was a little more willing to, move outside of his own box, but I'm not going to knock the guy for it.
I agree with
what you think. And the funny thing is, for me or anybody else to act like they know more about basketball or coaching than Jim Boeheim, it's a joke. He's in the Hall of Fame, Yeah,
I do agree, though. I mean, situations like yesterday, we've seen more of that, right, where, in all honesty, that press that he runs, it's kind of like a 1-3-1-ish type full court zone, and it causes a lot of chaos for the other team. And I do think it's fair, though, that you get to that point and then he calls them off, and it's like you could go for another few possessions like that and get away with it.
Which, by the way, that press, one of the great things about it was you had a great shot blocker in the back, and in 2003 it was Jeremy McNeil, oddly enough, would be that last man back. So you could press up a little more, be a little more aggressive, knowing you had that rim protector back. And the NCAA really, really tarnished Boeheim's legacy by, first of all, Boeheim has 1,116 wins, not the 108 less that the NCAA would like to say. It's the biggest bunch of crap ever. Joe Paterno knew that people on his staff were molesting boys, and he got his wins reinstated. Boeheim had a couple kids working for minimum wage at the YMCA, or Fab Mello cheated on a test. And the year that they made Fab Mello ineligible right before the NCAA tournament, that was a top 4 national championship team.
In my opinion, it might be collectively. I'm not saying that they're better than the 03 team, but I think collectively, talent-wise, it was probably the best team Syracuse has ever had that year.
Yeah, I mean they took it right from a chance for Boeheim to win another one right before the NCAA tournament, because Fab Mello, who, if you know the backstory about Fab Mello, he couldn't even speak English when he came to this country, and so you expect him to. Was it right that he? And whether the level of cheating, we'll never know. It was more like someone helped him write a paper,
right.
And now all of a sudden, and you look at what someone like Fab Mello's life would be like if he didn't have that opportunity. Of course, he passed away, but he did play in the NBA. But yeah, that was an example of they couldn't win without Fab Mello. It was because of his defense. It's because of that rim protector in the middle of the zone and the back of that press, and so. Yeah.
Let's get out of here on some positive notes. Let's go around the room here quickly. Favorite Boeheim moment or something that sticks out. I have 2.
I got a million.
Yeah.
Why don't you give yours first?
Because unfortunately, I'll start with one that is within the ACC, but it's got to be, for a lot of us, the jacket ripoff in Duke.
Oh, you took mine.
Yeah.
But my other one is when he stepped off the plane from New Orleans in 2003. Holding the trophy and wearing the orange felt pimp hat.
Cowboy hat, yeah.
Just, phenomenal. if you could draw probably a more happy Jim Boeheim, I don't think you could within that moment.
Jim Boeheim also for that national championship doesn't get respect because they say, well, he had Carmelo Anthony.
Right.
Well, every national championship had a great player, and Carmelo was ours that year.
Mm-hmm.
But so they don't say that. They don't say, oh, gee, Mike Krzyzewski only won the national championship because he had Elton Brand or he had Christian Laettner or it's absolutely ridiculous, that argument, to say, Wake Forest had Tim Duncan, so that one doesn't count either. Of course, that's how you do it.
Right.
You need a elite talent.
Mm-hmm.
So, one thing, too, you've mentioned the jacket throwing incident. I mean, I think we all want to throw off our jacket because here we go. Syracuse coming off the Big East into the ACC, and they're down in Cameron playing Duke for the first time. And what I always said was, there is no way that the powers that be in the ACC are going to let Syracuse come in and win this conference. And sure enough, they took it right from them. C.J. Fair, had won the game for Syracuse in Cameron, something that none of these Southern Tobacco Road, I'll check my language here, folks could have handled. They couldn't have handled that, right?
Right.
But Boeheim did it. He went down there in Cameron at a time when nobody won in Cameron, in his first trip down there as a member of the ACC, and they beat Duke. And Ted Valentine took it away from him. And I would love to see a statistic of Syracuse's record in games that Ted Valentine refereed.
He was on the call last night.
Yeah, of course he was.
Yeah.
And there were two calls that I remember from yesterday. The jump ball call late, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious.
Mm.
So, yeah, I wanted to throw my jacket too. I mean, I was furious because I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. And, yeah, life in the ACC, that was like a way that from that moment on, it was like, why do I even care about this anymore? Because this is what it's going to be like. So, anyways, how about you, Nate? What's your memories of Boeheim?
Oh, that's my favorite one.
The jacket throwing. So that is.
I'm a younger Syracuse fan than you guys. I don't have as much in the Rolodex from past years.
Yeah, so that is like a recent one, obviously.
Mm.
But, I can go off the top of my head. Yeah, obviously winning the national champ. Seeing him cut down the nets in New Orleans, the same place that he had it taken away from him by Keith Smart, in 1987, was really something, like highly emotional. I shouldn't care that much, right, about something like sports, but that was highly emotional. Felt so good. Nobody deserved it more than Jim Boeheim, and he got it. But the 10 effing games, Jerry McNamara in the Big East tournament, and again, that's how the Big East was. This ACC, it's like going to church. At the ACC tournament, it literally is like going to church. They have their finals on the Sunday. Big East was Saturday night, and yeah, Jerry McNamara coming off that national championship with a little bit of a diminished roster. We still had Jerry McNamara, and I hard press anybody to find a better individual performance over a stretch of games in a conference tournament than Jerry McNamara in that Big East tournament. And Jerry McNamara did take a lot of crap in the same, and I think that's one reason why Boeheim was so mad, because people bash Boeheim for no reason. He should have been adored by everybody who loves Syracuse basketball in the same way that Jerry McNamara did. My God, the 3-pointers he hit in the first half of the national championship game should have been enough. If Jerry McNamara never hit another 3-pointer for his career, Syracuse fans should be kissing his feet. But yet the local media, said Jerry McNamara is overrated. People love to say things like that about Syracuse. Jim Boeheim's overrated. Well, this year it was Jerry McNamara is overrated. And look what he did. I mean, and you're talking about a kid from Scranton, who's barely 6 feet tall, and he single-handedly lifted Syracuse to that Big East tournament. And so in the post-game press conference, he said, we wouldn't have won 10 effing games without Jerry McNamara. So I remember that because, like I do, I feel like it really bothered Boeheim because Boeheim has faced that type of scrutiny that the press and some fans were putting on Jerry McNamara, and so he stood up for him, which is another reason to love Boeheim. Stood up for his players and his friends, like nobody, like Mike Krzyzewski wouldn't. Mike Krzyzewski's supposed to be this great leader. Well, why doesn't he stand up for his friend Jim Boeheim and say that they should reinstate those wins? You know why? Because that would have put Boeheim on track to overtake Krzyzewski for the all-time win leader. So that really upsets me. Boeheim, extremely loyal, obviously, stayed true to his school for all those years, and it really bothers me that Mike Krzyzewski never stood up and said that it's crap that Boeheim had those wins revoked. We all saw him 108 times. He went out and got a win, and they took it away. They took him all away from his win total, and he's still number 2, and still people say he's overrated. It's unbelievable. So Boeheim, extremely loyal. I don't even want to say to a fault. And another instance of this was Bernie Fine. Bernie Fine was Jim Boeheim's friend. There was investigations into whether he molested any of these ball boys, and they never found anything because it didn't happen. And it was politically incorrect to say it didn't happen. You don't want to like discourage victims from coming forward, but I'm pretty sure that Boeheim knew it didn't happen. Whether Bernie Fine was a gay man, a closet gay man who may have had tendencies, I firmly believe he never acted on them because this was thoroughly investigated and nothing ever came up for it. So while it would have been easy for Jim Boeheim not to say anything, he stood up for Bernie Fine. You know? Mm-hmm. And so again, that's just another example of like Boeheim's loyalty to his friends and family and players in his program. So another memory was 1984 Big East tournament when Michael Graham was punching Andre Hawkins, and Georgetown was just nasty, intimidating the officials, and they intimidated that officiating crew at Madison Square Garden that night in a semifinal game, I think, to the point where it cost Syracuse the game. And so Boeheim wasn't going to take it. In the press conference, he walked in, said the best team didn't win tonight, walked off through a chair, and that was the leads in Sports Center, back when Sports Center really meant something. You couldn't watch highlights on YouTube, and you didn't have 50 million games on any given night in the mid to early 1980s. There would be one game, maybe 2 games on TV on ESPN. You had the games on the weekends on CBS, ABC, and NBC. So a lot of times you'd see like David Rivers for Notre Dame, and then you'd see a Big Ten game on CBS. And but during the week, you had ESPN, and you'd watch, or your local like Raycom, your local television stations that would cover games and stuff. And it was a game like Syracuse Georgetown in 1984 in the Big East semifinal was like a Super Bowl type of feel, and the whole country watched. And that's why we got players like Stevie Thompson and Mike Hopkins to come from California. So yeah, the memories of Boeheim in that arena, there's so many of them. The arena of the national spotlight on the Big East on a Monday night or in Madison Square Garden, are memories that I'll never forget. It'll never happen again either. So a good time now on Boeheim's stepping down would be to watch Requiem for a Big East again. If you don't know what I'm talking about here, it was an amazing time. So. Other memories I could probably go on and on, but I won't.
All right, so that should just about wrap it up. We have a guest appearance right now as well. I see. Jim, happy to see that you've joined us, Coach Boeheim.
Yeah, I just want to say that we wouldn't have won 10 effing games if it wasn't for Paul Harris. But really, honestly, thank you, Jim Boeheim, for really given me so much to be passionate about growing up as a kid and as a student at Syracuse and an alumni of Syracuse, for putting our school on the national map, building one of the best programs in the history of college basketball. And and doing it as a local guy here in our own backyard and never leaving. I learned a lot about loyalty and competition from Jim Boeheim, and I love the guy. So it is a sad day.
Agree with your sentiments, especially from someone who went to, for me anyway, college in Pitt and Big Ten territory. It was always fun to mess around with them, that stretch run there. So appreciate, Jim, you coming and joining for this and sharing your thoughts. Nate, you as well, and handling everything behind the scenes. Thanks again, everybody, tuning in and watching. I'm sure you tell us your favorite Jim Boeheim memories and moments as well. Until next time, have a great day.